Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 133. We've got one of college baseball's outstanding coaches on as a guest, and these episodes are very popular, and I think this one in particular will be particularly popular with parents and kids that are listening to this together in the car on the rides to games for really two big reasons. One, he's done an awesome job in multiple places of turning programs around and kicking out some really good players and having some awesome outcomes on the field. So I'm excited to learn about some of the things that he implements from a cultural standpoint, what are the key indicators of success are for him. But I think also he's a really good guest because he represents a high academic institution. So this isn't just about playing baseball. This is also about becoming a great student, a great person. And certainly the kids that I've interacted with who have gone through his university are really upstanding guys that I've enjoyed working with. So I think you'll have a lot to teach. And this is one I'm really looking forward to. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients to the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, Cressey. Today's guest took over as Duke Baseball's 25th head coach in June of 2012. Since that time, he's coached 33 Major League Baseball draft picks, 16 All-ACC selections, 4 freshman All-Americans, and 3 All-Americans. In addition, he has led the program to 2 Super Regionals and an ACC Baseball Tournament Championship title, which hadn't previously happened in the program's history. Duke has also reached 3 consecutive postseasons for the first time in program history, and their postseason appearance in 2016 broke a 55-year drought. In 2021, he became the first Duke coach to reach 100 career ACC wins, becoming one of 6 active head coaches to achieve that mark at the time. In 2021, Duke won the first ACC Baseball Tournament Championship title in program history and its first conference title since 1961. Prior to his position at Duke, he served as head coach at Appalachian State from 2005 to 2012. Before that, he'd been the head coach at Pfeiffer University from 2000 to 2004 and an assistant coach at his alma mater, Davidson College, from 1996 to 1999. He graduated from Davidson in 1996, earning a BA in psychology. While here, he was a program standout pitcher on the baseball team. He became just the 3rd pitcher in program history to win 20 career games and now ranks among the top 10 in Davidson history in wins, strikeouts, innings pitched, starts, complete games, and shutouts. He also received a master's degree in physical education from Mississippi State in 2004. Please welcome to the show, Chris Pollard. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Really welcome you to the show. I'm excited to talk.
Eric, thanks for having me on.
So I'm I got a million questions for you just because I've seen what you've done, not just at Duke, but even at Appalachian State beforehand. But I think it's always good to get maybe a perspective on the path to coaching. I know you're a standout player at Davidson and had a great career yourself. What was the initial transition like for you from playing to coaching? Was it a hard adjustment, or was it something that was very natural for you?
Yeah, so I fall in that category of those that can no longer teach. That's how I backed my way into coaching. I after playing at Davidson, signed and had a very lackluster career in independent baseball. The fall of 1996, I came back to Davidson with every intention of going to spring training, and was training and working out and sort of coaching on the side. But my primary focus was on me and getting an opportunity in professional baseball. And the Coastal Plain League had just been announced into existence. They were starting to formulate teams for that following spring. And Dick Cook, who was my coach and mentor at Davidson, said, "Hey, why don't you go be a pitching coach in this new Coastal Plain League? Think it might be a great opportunity for you, and you might be good at it." And I, at the time, Eric, was rooming with Brett Beretti, who coaches at Columbia University and has done just an incredible job there with that program over the last 17 years. And I came home all offended, and I said to Brett, "Hey, coach thinks I should take this job in coaching, but I'm going to spring training." And he said, "No, you're not. Like, you need to face reality that maybe your playing days are in the rearview mirror." And so, fast forward, I did a summer as a pitching coach in the CPL. The following year, Pete Bach, who formulated that Coastal Plain League, gave me an opportunity to be a head coach, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with being a head coach, the responsibility, the pressure, the adrenaline, and from there, kind of never looked back.
That's amazing. I think one of the things I'm always fascinated is like the transition from playing to coaching. We've talked about it on a couple of previous podcasts, is this like mindset of, to be a starting pitcher, right? It's everything is focused around getting ready for that day. To be a really high level athlete, sometimes you have to be, to a degree, selfish about when you train, when you eat, when you sleep, all these things. And then when you go to coaching, it's very much about like serving others. And I think it's one of the reasons why we see so many catchers that, smoothly transition to it. Certainly like utility players always seem to do really well. Like, did you find that was like an actual adjustment you had to make, or was it something that sat well with your personality?
No, I think it's a great point. And I think your point about catchers and why they're so suited, because they are servant leaders, right? I talk about that all the time with our catchers. I've got a son who's a catcher. I say it's the ultimate servant leadership position on the field. I think one of the things that helped me, I was one of those pitchers that really liked to be involved in the game when I wasn't pitching. Yeah. I like being a teammate and really celebrating the success of my teammates. I like hearing and discussing and talking strategy in the dugout as a game went along. And so, for me, converting to being a starting pitcher in my final 3 years there at Davidson sort of gave me an opportunity to get to know the game better. I realized when I got to Davidson, I didn't really know the game that well coming out of high school, but playing for a guy like Dick Cook, and who has been at so many different levels of the game, from professional baseball to being involved with the USA program and the Olympics and everything that he did at Davidson. I learned a lot just sitting there on the bench watching.
Interesting. You mentioned, learning, and the game's evolved a lot, since I think you were in college in 96 to 99, give or take, up until 96. How have you seen it change just in the time that you've been involved as a coach? Obviously we see more technology and all that, but even just in the context of, the outside pressures and, so maybe some of the extrinsic motivation, to players, is it dramatically different in your eyes?
Yes, it is dramatically different. It starts at the lowest levels of our sport. It goes all the way to the highest levels of our sport. And this is something that you've talked on a lot, and that is early specialization. So, we have these athletes that want to specialize in baseball at a really early age. The recruiting piece has changed a ton, and it's earlier, and it's more intense, and it's more laborious. Obviously, the money involved now in college baseball is different and better than it was in the early 90s. And I think with more money involved comes higher expectations. And so you're starting to see that dynamic in our sport with coaching turnover. And, it's a good and a bad problem to have. We have more eyeballs on us than we ever have. But with that comes responsibility. Certainly it continues to evolve in terms of the training piece, right? Where athletes have more information than they've ever had. We have more technology to bring to bear in truly understanding how to train players. We use our eyes less and are able to verify more information than we ever have. And I think that's made for better, more dynamic, healthier athletes. So it continues to change. I tell people it's probably changed more in the last 10 years than it did in the previous 30 or 40 years. But certainly, I think we're in another sort of window of really historic change in our sport with, the introduction of the transfer portal and with the introduction of NIL and what that's going to do just to the entire landscape of college athletics.
Absolutely. I remember there was a quote from Nick Saban, many, many years ago. And by many, I said, 6 to 7, where he talked about this concept of having to unrecruit players sometimes when they get there, just because you go through this crazy courtship process as a good high school athlete, where you have all these schools that are interested in you, and in many cases advisors and in-home visit with scouts and all that stuff. And I mentioned it to Butch Thompson, we chatted a couple of years ago, and he said he saw some of the same things, and that was probably 2019, 2020. I guess I'm curious, are you seeing that where a kid eventually, everybody kind of takes their licks as a freshman at an ACC program or anything like that. But do you find that you actually have to kind of bring guys down to a little bit of a new reality when they get there?
It's interesting. We recruit these guys twice in high school, right? So you recruit them in the commitment process, and in our sport that happens pretty early, between the 9th grade and the 11th grade year. And then if you're getting the right type of player, you're sort of recruiting them again in their senior year, except instead of recruiting against other college programs, you're recruiting against them, making an immediate jump into professional baseball. And then you're right, they get to campus, and then all of a sudden you've told them how great they are for the last 3 and sometimes 4 years, and now they're struggling, and you're in a position where you want to be really honest with them, and you want to train them hard, and you want to give them tough love. And I think what I found, especially with our kids here at Duke, because they're really high achievers academically and athletically, they're really talented, so they have failed very little before they get to us. I really believe that's one of the hardest parts of the transition to a place like Duke, is truly being able to accept and embrace a growth mindset, and realize that the failure, the struggle, the adversity, the tough love, that those are all things that are going to help me grow. Because it's really easy for a guy that's never really failed, and they get to a place and they start to experience failure, to go, whoa, wait, something's wrong. This must not be the right place for me, or this might not be, and so helping young players understand that, hey, this struggle is really good for you, and it's gonna actually accelerate your growth can be a tough thing.
Yeah, I think it's a competitive advantage that college baseball has compared to professional baseball. I mean, there are obviously several in that dynamic, but people forget the continuity that comes with being in a college program. You have the same head coach, the same pitching coach, the same hitting coach, all this stuff, same athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches. And you go to professional baseball and you might deal with 15 different people who all have that same role. They're just at different levels. So in many cases, you can get mixed messages. And when you're going to a completely different environment, you always want to try to minimize variables, right? The new variable is, hey, I'm moving to North Carolina and I've never lived there before. So it does kind of help to just have maybe a smaller circle of people that are there that are all rowing in the same direction for you. So it's an interesting point. I'm fascinated, to shift gears a little bit, by this concept of culture change. And you've got a recent history of turning programs into winners after dry spells. And in Appalachian State, I think it was they'd won 10 games in the 2 years before you got there. And honestly, where I first heard your name, it was you guys basically took it to NC State. I think it was 2 years in a row when they had Rodon and Trey Turner on the rosters. I mean, they had some dudes, and I want to say you went out there, and it was a couple years in a row and really put on a show. And then obviously coming to Duke, I think it was the first postseason appearance in 2016 for like 55 years. So, two scenarios where you've turned guys around, and then even Appalachian State, like the number of draft picks, and you see that Duke as well. I'm curious if there were certain lessons that you learned in both these places, certain initiatives that made a big difference for you as you tried to, effectively flip a culture.
Well, so it's interesting. The first thing I would say is whether it was making the jump to Pfeiffer or then the jump to Appalachian or finally the jump in 2012 to Duke, I would say at all three places, I realized after 1 year on the job that if I didn't change who I was and change how we went about things, that we were doomed to fail. So I think the ability to be adaptable and be self-aware enough to recognize when something's not working and you've got to adjust is really important. I would also say that I didn't understand the importance of and really didn't understand how to build culture until I got here to Duke. Now, looking back on the experience at Appalachian, the one thing I can see in the rear view, that 2012 team that we had at Appalachian won 41 games, won the Southern Conference Championship, took 2 out of 3 from LSU, who wound up going on to win the SEC that year. We went to the finals of the Charlottesville Regional. That team had culture, and I didn't even know it. Like, I wasn't aware enough and understanding enough of culture to recognize that team had it. Since I've been here at Duke, our culture has evolved over my 11 years because each time we've added a different facet or element to our culture, it's been because of recognition that we were missing a key piece that was going to help us grow. And so to give you a little bit of that evolution, after year one here at Duke, we really set about promoting and really from the top down and from the bottom up, embracing a process over outcome mentality. We wanted our guys to really fall in love with the process. And for us, we define process with 3 elements. One being your routines. So we wanted guys to be really routine oriented. We wanted guys to be mindful. Let's commit to be where our feet are. And 3, understand how we can use our breath to put ourselves in an optimal performance state. Those are the 3 pieces of process that we talk about on almost a daily basis with our players. A few years into our journey here at Duke, realized, man, process is really important, but process is pretty individual. And this is a team sport, and we've got to get outside of ourselves more than we do. And a concept that we've already talked about a little bit here today, servant leadership became a real foundational aspect of what we do. And we define servant leadership very specifically as just caring about the people around you more than you do yourself. We talk about falling in love with each other's success and really wanting to have a group in the locker room that embraces that dynamic, where they're going to celebrate each other's success. In 2018, in the midst of arguably the best season in the history of the Duke baseball program, we wound up winning 45 games and went to the finals of a super regional, lost out to Texas Tech in a game to go to the College World Series. Yeah, I really realized through that journey how important gratitude was as a core principle within culture. I think gratitude is the key for fighting off entitlement. And once you start to experience success, it's pretty easy to let some feelings of entitlement seep into your approach. And so we talk a lot about practicing intentional gratitude as a way to ward off entitlement. And then lastly, another kind of principle that we've already embraced or talked about here on the podcast, and that is just having a growth mindset. You know, really rewiring how you look at failure and embracing failure instead of avoiding failure, embracing adversity instead of avoiding adversity. And we talk all the time about, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And the way you do that is being really conscious of stepping out of your comfort zone on a regular basis. So those are the four pieces that we talk about when we talk about, sort of building our culture or maintaining our culture. But it has really evolved over time to get to this point, Eric.
Yeah. And as you're describing it, I can almost think of a fifth one, whether you recognize it as like the humility, right? Is to recognize that, what we did in year one, either A, we were having success by accident, or B, we recognized that there was something that we didn't do well and we had to work on it. And that's an underpinning to the growth mindset is the awareness to do it. It's interesting as you're talking about gratitude being the key to avoiding entitlement. First thing that came to mind, Paul Goldschmidt wrote handwritten thank you notes to everyone on our staff on the last day of the lockout this year. And we had most of the Cardinals organization training there, a lot of their guys that were there. And you look at Goldie and like guys just flock to him. Like everybody just goes up a level when he's around. And I've seen him take like younger, like first year big leaguers under his wing. I mean, heck, he's paid for their training at times, just like a completely stand-up guy, who's about to potentially win a National League MVP, and he's writing handwritten thank you notes. It does speak volumes for what that means. Yeah, it was first thing that came to my mind. So that's awesome.
Eric, we talk about looking for it in the recruitment process.
Yeah.
It's an intangible that we want to identify in our recruits. And I'll hang up the phone with a recruit and I'll type in my notes, say, hey, this guy's got gratitude. I can hear it in his voice because we know that's a guy that's going to be able to fight off entitlement.
Yeah, it goes a long way. And you can see it in the interactions too, even just things like holding doors for people and saying thank you when you're out to eat. And those things go a really, really long way. It's how you do one thing is how you do everything. And maybe it leads into like a little bit more of a deeper dive on the recruiting front. What are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing high school players and certainly their parents, make in this process? Do you have certain recruiting pet peeves or mistakes that you see as they reach out and go further down that process?
Yeah, we always talk about this at our prospect camps, Eric. My biggest pet peeve, since you asked, is when the parent will email on behalf of the player. And I actually take a moment in our camps to say, look, when I was a young coach, I would actually respond to those emails and I would engage the parent. And then I don't know, about 10 years ago, I stopped doing that and I would respond and say, hey, that's great and all, but I'm really interested in recruiting your son, not you. and now, after 23 years of doing it, I just see an email from a parent and I say, okay, we're not going to engage because it must be more important to the parent than it is to the player. And I think having the player take ownership in the process is first and foremost in terms of getting this journey off on the right foot.
Yeah, and you can tell when the parents are writing the emails pretending to be the kids. That's the worst.
100%.
15-year-olds don't use semicolons. We know this.
That's right. Yeah.
So you see that quite a bit. One question I have is maybe a follow-up, and this is one I've made that point in the past, and it's good to reiterate it. And I think one of the questions I always get back is, how much should they reach out? They don't want to feel like they're spamming you and sending you one every week with their updated schedule and a new video and new statistics. But what's the right amount of outreach? When should it start? How does somebody get on Coach Pollard's radio?
Yeah, no, it's such an important question. And it's funny because I can answer it thinking about it from a coach's perspective, but now I'm going through it with my own teenage boys and I'm looking at it from the dad's perspective. And number one, when? I don't think it's ever too early to reach out and say, Coach, I'm going to be a college baseball player and I'm interested in your program. Eric, we have sixth graders that will email and say, Coach, I just want you to know that I'm planning on playing college baseball and Duke's my top choice. And we're not interested in recruiting sixth graders, but what I will say is when I read that note, I say, this guy's got guts. Yeah. This guy's got confidence in himself. If he's tough enough and confident enough to email me as a sixth grader, then I'm gonna listen and I'm gonna file that away somewhere in our database. The second part of your question, I think, is an important one. How much is too much and what's not enough? I've advised my own sons, I think touching base about once a month, via email. And I think the other thing that guys got to understand, Eric, is, to a 14, 15, 16-year-old player, email feels like something that your grandparents do.
Yeah,
It feels like kind of a dead language, but it's still going to be the best way to make an initial contact with a coach and open up a line of communication and open up a dialogue. And so even though players don't probably use email a whole lot in their normal day-to-day, and particularly with their interactions with their peers, I think being good at email and checking email is going to need to be part of the recruiting process.
That's a good one. So interestingly, just in the last couple of days, a study actually came out that looked at injury rates as they relate to showcase appearances. They've actually found that the average date of first showcase, they looked at the top 5 rounds of pitchers between 2011 and 2020, and then basically checked, it was about 27% of them had Tommy John surgery in the years that followed. And then what they basically found was that kids who went to showcases younger and who went to showcases more frequently were more likely to blow out their elbows effectively. So it kind of begs the question, do showcases fit in? Where does if you look at the composition of your roster, are they people that have come from relationships with coaches you have on the youth athlete side of things, previous players? Are they, athletes that have come to your camps? What's the composition if you had to look at, or is it a combination of a number of factors, seeing them over and over again?
I think it's a great question. The answer is it's a little bit of all of it. And I think you know this better than anybody that deals in this world. What makes me nervous is when a player says, yeah, coach, I'm going to shut down now that the summer's over with. I'm going to take 4 weeks off, but then I'm going to ramp back up for 2 weeks and go out and pitch in Jupiter, or I'm going to go to this showcase. We take, and your guys do too, we take about 8 weeks of a really steady progressional ramp up to be bullpen ready, and then another few weeks of bullpen readiness before we're throwing live to a hitter, so that capacity and volume is built up. I think this yo-yo where guys shut down, ramp up really quickly, shut down, I do believe is a big part of the injury risk that happens. I understand the allure of showcases because you can cast a big net. You've got a lot of coaches in one spot to be able to showcase what you can do. But I agree with you. I think guys have got to be careful about becoming showcase performers and not true baseball players. And we've done that to ourselves a little bit in our sport, where guys are really good at sort of being in a showcase setting, but maybe not as good when it comes to the subtleties of playing the game the right way. And and we're to blame as coaches because we've proliferated this kind of recruiting model. But I do think there needs to be a balance there. And I always tell guys, I think and I don't want to sound self-serving when I say this, but I do really believe in this value. I think being on a college campus and attending a college camp where you can be more targeted in terms of being elbow to elbow with the coaching staff, interacting with them in a more of an on the field manner versus I'm sitting up 17 rows in the grandstand just watching guys run around on the field. I think that camp environment, you get a lot better sense of who a guy really is as a person.
Yeah, and you see how they interact with coaching, which I think is a vital part of that, that growth mindset discussion.
Yeah, really good point.
I'm 1,000% in favor of camps, and not only that, the overwhelming majority of college coaches that I've interacted with kind of meet kids where they're at. Like you'll take a pitcher out of camp, even if he's not ready to throw live in games, even if it's just a 80% bullpen on the side or something like that. There's a little bit more of an ability to meet people where they're at. And I think that's just a vital, important consideration because everyone, has kind of a slightly different calendar. So I think that's outstanding. Is there an age where you're like, absolutely no, even talking about your own son, where a showcase would be totally off limits, like, or is it something you would wait till ages, 17, 18, if they're going to do it, or is it something that you wouldn't do at all?
Yeah, it's a great point. I've seen a couple of social media posts that have resonated with me with regards to this topic, which is, there's maybe a value in attending one showcase, relatively early in this recruiting progression, getting a sense of what it's like to go through it, the timing of it, the adrenaline rush, the readiness that you have to have, and then don't go back until you've got something to showcase.
Yeah.
I think I've read that a couple different places. I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, get one under your belt so you kind of know what it's like, but then you need to go train and get better, so that if you do climb back into that showcase setting, you've got some metrics that are going to resonate with coaches.
That's incredible. So we've talked about, the baseball and the, certainly like the personality and work ethics that it takes to compete in the ACC. But, I don't think we can overlook the fact that you're also at a very high academic institution. So what are the complexities that you deal with, maybe both in the recruiting process and once kids are on campus, that maybe, other schools that aren't that prestigious academically don't have to deal with? What should the 16-year-old kid and parent, who want to play at Duke, know about that?
Sure. Well, I think the one thing I would want to communicate is that there just are some standards that we've got to have met before we can really engage in the recruiting process, because otherwise it becomes sort of a waste of time for that player and their family, and for us. So, we always say, like, anytime a player is identified and you say, man, that guy's got some ACC ability, well, the very next thing out of my mouth is, all right, let's get a transcript. That because if the transcript doesn't match up, then there's no reason to pursue it. I think that players have really got to use their guidance office to have a sense of, here's the range of schools I'm interested in. And I think players should have a wide range, especially in today's college baseball, post-pandemic, where you've got all the extra years of eligibility. Players shouldn't pigeonhole themselves to one program or one level, but really be open. And then, do the homework early. Is this a school where I'm going to need to take an SAT or an ACT? Is this a school where I'm going to need to have some AP classes on my transcript? If so, maybe I've got to get some prerequisites early in my high school career, and do the due diligence on the academic side as much as they're doing their training and their preparation on the physical side, so that when they do find a place that might be a match from an ability standpoint, they've got what they need in the barn academically, to make it work.
Yeah. I always get really concerned when I see kids that have one or two schools on their list. I always want to see a wider list, because you're asking it to line up from an ability standpoint, academics, social, geographic, all these different factors. And the chances of you just nailing it with one or two choices just is not great. So I think that's a really, really important consideration. And it's a good message for people to take into account much, much earlier. You don't want to get surprised at age 17 when, you hit 93 and show off a wipeout breaking ball, and all of a sudden a big time school comes calling. You want to have those ducks in a row much earlier. Maybe touching back on some of the complexities in college baseball right now. I know we hinted at them earlier, but the transfer portal has obviously changed dramatically. The name, image, likeness dynamics. How do you think they're impacting the game, and do you see it, changing for better or for worse in the years ahead?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and to tell you, I know exactly how it's going to change our sport. I'm not sure anybody knows what the end game is here and where the finish line is. I think it really started with the pandemic, and the combination of the NCAA creating the extra year of eligibility for anybody that was impacted by the pandemic, combined with Major League Baseball shortening the draft. We had a 5-round draft in 20, and then post-pandemic, it's been a 20-round draft, has created quite a logjam in our sport, right? And now you've got the transfer portal, which in some ways is meant to release that pressure valve, right? To give an outlet for some of this logjam to clear itself out. But it is made for a lot of movement, and that can be tricky from when you combine the transfer portal, the abbreviated or truncated draft, the extra year of eligibility, with the fact that at least at the Division I level, we have some really specific scholarship and roster limitations that we've got to meet. It's really made for a moving target in terms of managing rosters, right? And then now you throw NIL on top of that, and I don't mind saying this, Eric. We had a meeting back in February of some of the ABCA Division I committee members, and the portal and NIL came up, and that's this is just a few months ago, and the sentiment was, hey, the transfer portal is sort of working out exactly the way it should. It's providing opportunities for guys that need a fresh start, and we really weren't dealing with NIL at all. And fast forward to the end of May and June, and we went from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
We went from very little NIL activity to it became a major part of the transfer process and recruiting enticement at several places. And it became what we were seeing in football and basketball. And, I tend to be in the camp of those who say that the NIL will sort of self-regulate itself.
Yeah.
It will eventually normalize, and hopefully it will move back to the original idea, which is to give these players an opportunity to use their name and their image and their likeness to go out and become their own businessman and businesswoman. And I think it'll eventually work itself back that way. But right now, it is absolutely in football, baseball, basketball, crept into the recruiting side of things.
Yeah.
And it's hard to keep it out of that world, and where that dust settles, I'm not sure. I heard a really interesting take on where NIL might sort of finally land yesterday as I was listening to a podcast while I was driving. And, there's some speculation that the only way to really get to a good landing point with it is to have a collective bargaining agreement between athletes and NCAA schools. And, and maybe 4 or 5 years down the road, that's where we end up.
Yeah, I think the one that fascinates me, and we're not going to know for a couple of years, is ultimately this money is coming from corporations, right? That expect a return on their investment, and that becomes the question: is what happens when the athlete doesn't deliver the return? There are very specific things that can be tracked, and it's not easy just to sell stuff by posting pictures on Instagram. There sometimes has to be a little bit more to it, and algorithms change and all that stuff. So I'm really intrigued to see if it becomes a distraction for players, where all of a sudden, it's one more thing on top of academics and athletics. Oh my gosh, I haven't sold 1,000 widgets for this company that's really, relying on me. And it is just, it's complexity, but that's the evolution we've kind of talked about. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Maybe one thing to tie a bow on this, this maybe recruiting discussion is I'd love to hear about a roadmap, and maybe your son's, process is even something that you could reflect on a little bit. But, you've got a 15-year-old who's listening to this podcast in the car with mom and dad on the ride home from a game. They'd like to be an athlete at Duke and potentially beyond into professional baseball. Is there almost like a checklist that, of steps that they should take as teenagers to make them, a Duke player, but also a championship caliber player while there?
I think it's a great question. I think it starts with, making sure that you've put a roadmap together for the academic side that's going to keep doors open. And so if the academic piece is really buttoned up, the classes that you're taking, the rigor of the classes that you're taking, the academic performance, the grades you're making in those classes, and then at some schools, being prepared to take the test and maximize your test scores. If that side of it is buttoned up, it really opens doors across all levels and all different types of programs. And then there is a marketing piece to this, right? It's reaching out directly to those universities that you're most interested in, and selling yourself. Yeah, here's who I am. I'm interested in your program, and here's why I think I'm a good fit. I absolutely think that's a piece, but the self-marketing can't supersede or get in the way of the actual most important part when it comes to the baseball side, which is the getting better.
Yeah.
Like at some point, you have to just put your head down and grind and work at your craft, and be process oriented, and allow that development, to put you in a position physically, where hopefully you're going to be able to land on the radar of those schools you're interested in. The marketing piece in and of itself, if you're not really strategic about how you're developing your physical tools, really is going to come up short.
Absolutely. Got to have the steak to go with the sizzle.
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. And then once they arrive, what are the, when you go back and you look at a Bryce Jarvis or, Joey Loperfido or Michael Rothenberg, one of these guys that, has done really, really well and obviously, progressed through school there and gone on to professional baseball. Are there certain benchmarks, things that they did that helped them to get to those points?
Well, I think the common thread, you brought up a couple of those guys, a Bryce Jarvis, a Mike Rothenberg, Joey Loperfido, Marcus Johnson, who was down there training with you. Common thread, all those guys are elite at process development, and they're really, really good competitors. And I think maybe the other piece that, in my opinion, gets overlooked, they don't mind failure. They don't fear failure. They don't avoid failure. I think one of the things is the longer I am in the profession, the biggest red flag for me is that guy that has a failure avoidance.
Yeah.
He'll as soon as something starts to get hard, or it's something that doesn't come easy to him, or he's starting to experience failure, he'll just shy away from it. Those kind of guys are not long for this sport, because our sport is predicated around failure.
Yeah. The one, as you mentioned, those guys, I thought of a quote. Actually, we had Sam Fold on this, and we had trained Sam during his career. And at the time, he had just made the transition that he was a player information coordinator in the Phillies dugout, and he's a general manager. And I asked him, what everyone knew you were always going to make a smooth transition from playing to coaching, managing, front office, whatever it was. What do you think it was that gave them that clue? And he said, I've always been really curious. And I look at guys like Bryce and Rothenberg and Marcus and Joey and Will Hoyle, all these guys, and they are curious, about across disciplines. I saw them interact with big leaguers and listen to Jarvis taking in a Scherzer conversation about a changeup. They were always seeking out information, but I think they were also really good at processing it. They didn't get overwhelmed with it. They understood that it wasn't about taking whatever somebody said and overhauling a good process that was already in place. Maybe it was something that impacted the 1% that could have been a big game changer for them. So I think you got to be curious, but you also have to have the right filter for knowing where you are in your development. Maybe you take in a lot at age 15 and maybe not so much at age 22, but I think it's testament to what you guys have done from a culture standpoint, that they're seeking out opportunities to struggle, because that's where the success comes from.
Yeah. Lifelong learners, right? I mean, yeah. So I think some of those guys you just referenced are really good at that. They're guys that are sponges when it comes to information. And then, like you said, it's the ability to have a good filter.
Yeah. Because
maybe you don't use all that information, but you take a lot in, and you're good at knowing which of that information you can put to use.
Absolutely. All right. We always wrap up with a lightning round. So I'm actually genuinely curious about this, because you can speak to maybe as a parent and a coach. What's one book that you think every player should read?
Yeah, this one was an awesome one. I loved it when I got your text. Atomic Habits.
Good one.
By James Clear. I think it should be like mandatory reading for Division I baseball players.
Yeah.
Great for process development.
Wasn't he a Davidson guy as well? I feel like that was mentioned. He had some connection to college baseball.
Yeah, he did. He played some college baseball. I'm not sure
if it was Davidson, but I know there was hints of that in the book. I'm going to go back and look up that after we get off the call. What about one book that you think every coach should read? What's one that's benefited you?
Yeah, I have to be one of our friends in common, Dusty Blake, gave me Intangibles, and I love Intangibles by Joan Ryan, which is really gets into weeds of like chemistry in the locker room.
I love it. If you could go back in time and give a young Chris Pollard some advice 20 years ago in the infancy of your coaching career, what would it be?
Yeah, do a better job of being the same guy every day.
I need that advice too.
That's one I have to work on all the time.
Yeah, you got it's parenting, it's the same thing too. So how about your favorite coaching memory?
Yeah, I absolutely. A couple of those guys you just mentioned were part of it. Being able to hoist an ACC championship trophy in Charlotte in 2021 meant so much to our program. It had been 60 years since Duke had won an ACC championship.
Awesome.
So that in of itself was special, but it came on the heels of COVID, and our guys had been through so much to stick together during COVID, and to come out of the other side of that and be able to hoist that championship was really meaningful.
That's awesome. I think COVID was such a challenge, but you also saw a lot of kids that show what they were made of. A lot of kids found a way to develop. They were lifting in garages and all these crazy things. So it was kind of cool in that regard. We saw it in the pro side as well. And then last but not least, we have a lot of kids and parents who listen to this podcast together, as I mentioned. If there was one bit of advice you could give to them, both the kids and the parents, what would it be?
Yeah, I would, I think it's really important that it is as important as this journey is, and maybe the parent and the player both have the same goal in mind, that it doesn't in any way detract from the relationship you have together. While you're working on this common goal, you can't miss the boat on this is still at the root time spent together, right? Yeah. This is and so keeping that at the forefront of your brain as you go through this process and this journey. I just, my son played a tournament in Alabama, and we decided to stop and look at a college on the way home. And it was partly about, hey, yeah, this is going to be neat for us to see if this school might be a fit. But it was also just the 7 hours in the car together, talking and spending time together that we all don't get enough of, that I thought was really important.
That's the cool thing about baseball is you can have those 7-hour days together, going to games for a really long time, and you always want to leave it better than you found it. So I love the idea of fostering a good lifelong relationship with the game, because it's something we got to keep in mind in the decades ahead. That's terrific. Coach, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. There was lots of really good pearls of wisdom in here that I'm sure will benefit players and coaches and parents alike. So really wish you guys well as you get going this fall. And again, keep up the good work. Thanks so much for doing this.
Nah, man, it was awesome. Humbled to be on with you, and I appreciate everything you've done to support our program and all the guys that have been down there with you. It's been awesome for them. They come back raving about it and better for the experience.
Appreciate it.